The year was 1893, and the Arctic was still one of the last untouched frontiers of Earth. A place where maps ended in blank whiteness, where compasses spun uncertainly, and where night could last for months. Fridtjof Nansen, a Norwegian explorer and scientist, was determined to conquer that emptiness by reaching the North Pole itself. He assembled a hand-picked crew, men hardened by storms and sea ice, and designed a ship unlike any other, the Fram, a vessel built to be lifted by ice rather than crushed by it. To the world, it was an extraordinary experiment in both engineering and endurance. But for those who sailed aboard, the journey into the white void became something far darker. The plan was simple, yet terrifying. Allow the Fram to freeze into the Arctic pack ice, and let the natural drift carry it closer to the pole. The men would live trapped in ice, isolated from the world for years if necessary. Scientists in Europe called it ingenious. Sailors whispered it was madness, because what no one admitted was that the Arctic had its own laws, its own secrets. Secrets that no ship and no man could ever hope to master. When the Fram slipped from the Norwegian coast in midsummer, villagers on the shore waved handkerchiefs and cheered. They believed they were watching history, but a fisherman in a nearby village refused to look. He muttered something about men who sought to break into the world's roof, the place where the sky touched earth. "The sea keeps what it wants," he said quietly, "and the ice buries the rest." Few paid him any mind. At first, the voyage was filled with optimism. The Fram glided northward, her oak hull creaking but unyielding. Nansen kept meticulous notes, the shifting colors of the aurora, the strange stillness of polar bears before they attacked, the way the ice itself seemed alive as it groaned and cracked beneath them. He wrote with a scientist's precision, but also with the awe of a man who felt he had stepped beyond the world he knew. His crew laughed, played cards, hunted seals, and took measurements, though some admitted they already dreamed of strange sounds in the night. Thudding steps across the frozen decks, faint whispers carried on the wind and shadows that lingered long after the aurora faded. By October, the ice closed in. The Fram became a black island in a white infinity. Around her, the sea froze solid, rising like jagged walls that imprisoned the ship in silence. There was no horizon, only a boundless whiteness that swallowed the world whole. The men still believed in Nansen, but they began to speak less, their voices muffled by endless snow and the creeping cold that seemed to seep not only into their bones, but into their thoughts. The first truly strange occurrence happened one night in December. The sun had set weeks earlier and would not rise again for months. A permanent night cloaked the ship, broken only by flickering lanterns and the eerie green glow of the northern lights. That night, the ship's carpenter swore he heard someone knocking from beneath the hull, as if another crew was trapped in the ice below them. He thought it a trick of exhaustion, but the knocking came again. 3 slow, deliberate raps, echoing up through the frozen wood. He woke Nansen, who came half-dressed to the deck. Together they pressed their ears to the ice. The sound was gone. The others laughed at the carpenter, calling him jumpy, but no one slept easily afterward. Weeks turned into months. The dark pressed down like a weight, time lost meaning. Men could not tell if it was morning or night, if days had passed or weeks. They began to dream of the sun, but when they woke, they found only darkness. It was in this black silence that whispers began to spread among the crew. One man insisted he saw figures moving just beyond the lantern light, tall, pale shapes that glided across the ice and disappeared when approached. Another swore that he woke in the night to find frost forming patterns on the walls of his cabin. Patterns that looked like runes, curling symbols he could not recognize. Nansen tried to keep order, but he too felt the strangeness pressing in. In his journal, which was later found, he wrote a single line one evening: "The ice listens." He never explained what he meant. In January, one of the dogs vanished. At first, the men thought it had broken free and wandered onto the ice, but the chain was still attached to the stake, torn clean in half, as if pulled with impossible force. They searched with torches but found no tracks, no blood, nothing at all. That night, the howling of the remaining dogs was unbearable, a chorus of terror that did not cease until dawn. By February, food supplies had dwindled. Men grew gaunt, their breath rattling in their lungs. But what frightened them more than hunger was the sense that something out there, something in the endless black, was watching. The navigator confessed to Nansen that he had seen lights far out on the ice. Not the flickering green of the aurora, but steady, glowing lanterns in the distance. Too many and too organized to be a trick of the sky. When he brought others to see, the lights were gone. Still, they swore at night they could hear voices outside the ship, faint but distinct, speaking in a language no one knew. The dogs barked, then whimpered, then fell silent. No one dared to open the hatches. By March, the men had changed. They spoke less, ate little, and stared long at the ice. Some began to believe the Arctic itself was alive, a vast entity swallowing them piece by piece. Others whispered of ancient tales, of the Hyperboreans, of a land at the top of the world where no mortal was meant to tread, guarded by spirits that lured explorers to their doom. The doctor tried to calm the men, saying isolation and darkness could twist the mind. But even he seemed shaken when one morning, the crew found deep scratches gouged into the ship's hull above the waterline, as though enormous claws had raked across it. There were no tracks leading to or from the ship, just the marks deep and undeniable. Then came the disappearance. It was April, and the endless night had at last begun to break, the faintest glow of twilight creeping over the horizon. One of the youngest sailors, a boy of just 19, vanished from his bunk. His clothes, his boots, even his coat remained neatly folded, but he was gone. They searched every corner of the ship, then the ice around it. No tracks, no blood, nothing. As if he had melted into the dark. The crew was shaken beyond repair. They began keeping watch in pairs, but it did little to soothe them. Each man feared he might be next. Nansen himself was pale, restless. He spoke little, except to write furiously in his journal. The men noticed his hands trembling as he scribbled. Sometimes he stared out at the ice for hours, as though listening for something. One night, in the dead calm of May, the whispers returned, but louder. Men woke to the sound of voices all around the ship, circling, overlapping, speaking in tones that seemed at once human and not. The dogs went wild, straining at their chains. One broke free and bolted into the black, vanishing in seconds. The men huddled inside, clutching rifles, while the voices grew clearer. They were calling names, their names. One by one, the voices outside whispered the names of every man on board, until the air itself seemed alive with them. Then silence fell, sudden and complete. When morning came, another sailor was gone. Again, no trace. Again, the folded clothes left behind as if he had willingly stepped into the night. Desperation set in. Nansen made a decision. He and a single companion would take sledges and dogs and attempt to reach the pole themselves, leaving the ship behind. He believed motion was survival. The rest of the crew begged him not to, claiming the ice wanted him to go, that it was leading him into a trap. But Nansen insisted. In June, under the ghostly glow of the midnight sun, he set off into the wasteland with his comrade, leaving the Fram and its cursed stillness behind. What became of the men left behind on the ship is a matter of speculation, rumor, and fragments of testimony that surfaced years later. But what is certain is this: the Fram was eventually found adrift, empty of crew, perfectly intact, with no sign of struggle. In the cabins lay journals half burned in the stove as if someone had tried to destroy them before vanishing. The last legible entry read simply, "It comes tonight." The Fram drifted silently through the ice, abandoned yet untouched, when a Russian whaling vessel stumbled upon her in 1896. To the sailors who boarded, the ship seemed less a vessel than a mausoleum. Food still sat on plates in the galley, as though men had left mid-meal. Tools lay scattered in the workshop. Journals and maps filled the captain's cabin, but many were charred or torn, their pages blackened as if to conceal secrets no one should read. There were no bodies, no signs of violence, only an emptiness that pressed on the intruders like a physical weight. Some refused to sleep on board, instead making camp on the ice. They swore the decks creaked with unseen footsteps and that lanterns flickered even when unlit. What frightened them most were the walls of the cabins. At first, they thought the frost had spread in strange patterns, but as their eyes adjusted, they saw the shapes were deliberate. Runes, spirals, symbols etched into the ice itself. No one admitted aloud that some of the marks resembled stars, constellations not easily visible from that latitude. But a few of the older crewmen whispered that they had seen such signs before, in Sami carvings deep in the northern wilderness, symbols meant to keep something out. Word of the discovery spread quickly, and when Fridtjof Nansen himself returned years later, alive but gaunt, he said little. His accounts of the journey north with his companion were carefully scientific. Measurements, distances, temperature logs. He spoke of harsh winds, broken sledges, starvation. He spoke of drifting until they encountered Franz Josef Land, where they were rescued by another expedition. But nowhere in his published account did he mention the fate of the Fram's crew, nor the strange occurrences they had documented in their final weeks. To the public, Nansen was a hero. To the few who read between the lines, he was a man haunted. But the mystery did not end there. In 1901, a Danish explorer named Knud Rasmussen claimed to have met an Inuit elder who spoke of white men who walked into the night. According to the elder, hunters had seen pale figures stumbling across the ice years earlier, far from any known expedition. They were barefoot, their eyes wide, their faces blank as though they were sleepwalking. The hunters kept their distance, for they believed the figures were no longer men but Tupilak, spirits of the dead, doomed to wander. Rasmussen dismissed it as myth, but the story lingered. Then there were the journals recovered from the Fram. Though many had been destroyed, some fragments survived. Historians pored over them, noting the increasingly frantic handwriting. One passage scrawled in the final weeks read, "It knocks beneath the hull again, louder each time. I fear the ice is not solid but a door, and something is knocking to be let through." Another, "Voices sing when the aurora is bright. They speak not to us but to the ice, and the ice answers." Skeptics claimed these were the ravings of men broken by isolation, hunger, and endless night. And perhaps they were. Yet the physical evidence, the runes, the claw marks, the disappearances, remained harder to dismiss. Years passed, but the Arctic kept whispering reminders of what had happened. In 1912, Norwegian trappers wintering near Spitsbergen reported finding human footprints in fresh snow, bare footprints, leading from the shore inland for several miles before vanishing abruptly. No ship had been sighted, and the nearest settlement was hundreds of miles away. One of the trappers swore that in the night, he saw a man standing on a ridge, watching their camp. When he approached, the figure melted into the darkness, leaving only frost patterns on the rocks where he had stood. The patterns, he claimed, looked like the same curling runes etched on the walls of the Fram. It was during this period that rumors of Nansen's private notes began to circulate. Supposedly, after his return, he kept a separate journal locked away, a record of what he truly witnessed. According to whispers, he wrote that he and his companion had seen impossible lights far out on the ice, pale columns rising like pillars into the sky, humming with a sound too low for the ear but felt in the chest. They had heard voices whispering in languages neither man knew, voices that grew louder when they camped near fissures in the ice. His companion begged him to leave offerings, scraps of food, carvings, even blood, to appease whatever dwelled beneath. But Nansen was a scientist, a man who believed in reason. He dismissed such rituals, though later entries suggested he feared he had been wrong. One chilling fragment supposedly read, "It follows, not us, but all who walk here. The pole is no place, it is a mouth, and mouths do not stay closed forever." By the 1920s, the mystery of the Fram had become legend, told in hushed tones by sailors and explorers alike. Some said the crew had succumbed to madness and walked willingly into the ice. Others claimed they had been taken by something beneath it, an ancient presence that lured men with whispers and lights. And then came the disappearances. In 1925, a Soviet expedition attempted to trace the drift of the Fram. Their radio messages grew erratic, filled with strange static and half-finished sentences. The last coherent transmission reported shapes moving on the horizon, though no storms were present. Weeks later, when searchers arrived, the Soviet camp was found deserted. Tents torn open, supplies scattered, but no bodies. Only a single word scrawled in charcoal on a canvas: Lyudi, the Russian word for people. Yet no footprints led away from the camp. Those who studied the case noted disturbing similarities to the Fram's fate: the absence of struggle, the quiet vanishings, the sense of something unseen pressing just beyond the lantern light. It was as if the Arctic was swallowing men whole, leaving behind only empty shelters as tombstones. By the time the Second World War erupted, interest in the mystery waned. Nations had more pressing horrors to face, but the Arctic kept its silence. Fishermen told of lights that rose from cracks in the sea ice. Hunters spoke of hearing names called out in the night, names of men long dead. Few believed them, but none dared linger when such things were heard. In 1958, however, a British research station recorded something remarkable. During a geomagnetic storm, their radio equipment picked up signals, rhythmic knocks and tones like a code. At first they thought it interference, but when played back at lower speed, the knocks seemed to form a pattern, sequences of 3, repeating endlessly. One of the scientists, unaware of the Fram's story, joked that it sounded like someone knocking from under the ice. When the recordings were later reviewed, another researcher noted the chilling coincidence. The carpenter aboard the Fram had reported exactly 3 knocks beneath the hull, 70 years earlier. The British buried the report in technical archives, never publishing it widely. But the legend grew among Arctic researchers. The idea that something beneath the ice was signaling, waiting, calling. By the late 20th century, the Fram had been preserved as a museum ship in Oslo. Tourists wandered its decks, marveling at its design. Few knew the darker stories whispered about it, yet some visitors claimed to feel uneasy, as though watched. Staff admitted that at night, when the museum was empty, the ship creaked as if shifting an ice that no longer bound it, and occasionally faint knocks echoed from its hull, though no hand touched it. Skeptics dismiss all of this as folklore, an accumulation of fear and exaggeration. But others insist the truth is stranger still, that the Arctic itself is not lifeless, but alive, ancient, and resentful of intrusion. That Nansen and his crew stumbled upon something not meant for human eyes, something that lures explorers into the white void and keeps their voices trapped beneath the ice. And yet the story does not end with them, because even now, in the 21st century, expeditions continue to vanish. Satellites occasionally capture anomalies over the polar regions. Unexplained lights, fissures that open and close with unnatural speed, shadows that seem to move against the wind. Scientists dismiss them as glitches, but those who remember the Fram know better. And somewhere, deep in the museum halls of Oslo, Nansen's journals still rest under lock and key. The official ones, neatly written, are on display. But the rumored private diary, the one where he spoke of voices, lights, and the mouth at the top of the world, remains hidden. Some believe it was destroyed. Others whisper that it still exists, guarded by institutions too afraid of what it reveals. But if the Arctic is indeed alive, if it hungers, then perhaps those warnings were never meant to be hidden. Perhaps they were meant as the only chance of survival for those who dare to tread where the maps end. It is 2023, and the Arctic is no longer the untouched frontier it once was. Oil rigs rise against the horizon. Icebreakers carve passages where once only the most daring explorers ventured, and satellites map the whiteness with cold precision. Yet for all its technological conquest, the Arctic still holds a silence that resists explanation. And sometimes, that silence breaks. In February of that year, a Norwegian research vessel reported unusual seismic activity north of Svalbard. Instruments recorded deep, rhythmic vibrations emanating from beneath the ice. Not tremors, not tectonic shifts, something patterned. The data was dismissed at first as equipment malfunction. But then, a week later, the knocks came again. This time, the sequence repeated 3 times, each separated by long pauses, exactly as described in the Fram's journals over a century earlier. The scientists were unsettled. Some joked nervously, referencing old sailor legends. But when the recordings were cross-analyzed with data from other stations across the Arctic Circle, they revealed a disturbing fact. The knocks were not localized. They were spread across hundreds of kilometers, as if the ice itself were resonating with a message. Meanwhile, a documentary crew visited the Fram Museum in Oslo. They planned a harmless history program about Nansen's achievements. But while filming at night, strange anomalies appeared on their cameras. Flickering shadows on the deck, brief flashes of pale figures just beyond the lens. At first, the crew assumed it was interference from the lighting rigs. Then, during playback, they caught something chilling. On the soundtrack, faint beneath the hum of the museum, were whispers. Not in Norwegian, not in any recognizable language, just low, sibilant murmurs that rose and fell like breath across the microphones. The footage was never aired. The museum, citing respect for history, requested its withdrawal. But fragments leaked online, fueling speculation. Some claimed the voices said names of crew members lost in the Arctic. Others swore they heard their own names in the static, as if the recording called personally to each listener. The growing unease culminated in March, when a Russian icebreaker operating near Franz Josef Land reported losing contact with 2 crew members. They had been sent to check an instrument tower on the ice. Radio chatter picked up their laughter, then silence. A search team found the tower intact, their gear still there, but no men. The snow was undisturbed, as if they had vanished into thin air. The icebreaker's captain, in his official report, wrote only one sentence beyond the routine technical details. "The Arctic is taking them again." This phrase spread quickly among sailors and researchers. Old stories of the Fram resurfaced, whispered anew. The knocks, the voices, the disappearances. Some called it superstition. Others, remembering the Soviet loss in 1925, refused to dismiss it so easily. In April, a small team of Norwegian historians obtained permission to examine Nansen's personal archives once more. Among the boxes of correspondence and scientific notes, they found a sealed envelope marked simply, "Ikke åpne," do not open. It was dated 1904, years after Nansen's return. Against instructions, they opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper filled with Nansen's unmistakable handwriting, but hurried, almost panicked. The ice is not silent. It remembers. It answers. It calls to those who walk above it, and it takes what it wants. The north is not a pole but an opening, and beyond it waits a hunger older than man. I have heard it. I have seen it. And one day it will no longer be content with whispers. The archivists tried to dismiss it as a fragment of private paranoia, but one of them, a linguist, noticed something else. In the margins of the page were symbols. At first glance, random scrawls, but when compared to the frost etchings photographed on the Fram's cabin walls in 1896, they matched exactly. And then came the last, most chilling event. In May 2023, satellite images captured a massive fissure opening in the ice near the pole. The crack was kilometers long, wide enough to swallow entire vessels. The images were clear, until the final frames. Then, without warning, the satellites failed. Transmission ceased. When they came back online hours later, the fissure was gone, sealed as though it had never been. Only the corrupted frames remained. Analysts dismissed them as data glitches, but those who looked closely swore they could make out shapes in the darkness of the fissure, towering pale forms frozen mid-motion, as if watching the satellite above. No one dared say it officially, but whispers returned, not of geology, not of climate change, of the Arctic itself as a thing alive, restless, hungry, and perhaps the most unsettling detail. In the days following the satellite anomaly, residents in Tromsø, Longyearbyen, and even Reykjavik reported hearing faint sounds carried on the wind. At first mistaken for distant ships or machinery, they were later recognized by a handful of scholars who had studied the Fram journals. The sound was rhythmic. 3 slow knocks, repeating. The world will dismiss it, as it always has. The journals will remain hidden, the whispers ignored, the disappearances explained away. But for those who have listened closely, the pattern is clear. The Arctic does not forgive intrusion. It does not forget. It waits. Perhaps Fridtjof Nansen knew this when he wrote his final cryptic words. The mouth will open. And perhaps it already has, because even now as you hear this story, the ice knocks, and someone, somewhere, answers,